the things in this sikha. This is a sikha from Purim Tovshin Tezayin, 1956. So the Rebbe first, before he gets into the actual topic under question, he first approaches the whole idea of questions in general. How or when or in what type of way are we supposed to ask questions? So he says in Tess, the paragraph begins after the 3 stars. The Geulah is concerning those that ask questions. Hari Bechlal, in general, when a person begins with questions, that's not a good sign of things. When the order is in a way that first we say we will do, and then we will understand, like it was by Matan Torah. This means he first accepts upon himself to study and fulfill Hashem's Torah. And after he studies and fulfills, so then a question arises. This is something that he's not held responsible for. Because under any way he'll fulfill the Torah, the way he accepted upon himself that he prefaced and said we will do before we'll understand. So if he has a question, he doesn't have a question, he's going to end up doing the right thing anyway. As opposed to when his wish is the first and foremost, they need to explain it to him, that it should make sense to him according to his understanding. And afterwards he will consider and contemplate, is this path of life also for him? Since we're talking about the Torah of Hashem, that he created the world, Adam created also human intellect, even human intellect understands, the intellect of nature understands, that created being cannot comprehend all the matters that are to be found by the Creator. It doesn't mean necessarily that the created intellect can understand the Creator's intellect. So the Rebbe says that really just answering questions for people that have questions is not necessarily the way to go. Since we know that we have to deal with people that their inclination is, the heart of a man is inclined towards bad from his youth, we began to act in such a way to answer those that begin with a question, even though that's not the normal way, that's not the appropriate way. But the main thing is, they should sit down and study, and then we rely on the accepted stance that the luminary in the Torah is going to return the person that is studying to good. The Soif Kol Soif Tushlam Atach was the Geulah Talmud. Eventually, we will reach the goal that study is great, that it brings to actions. This is like a general overview of the idea of questions, and here the Rebbe is going to approach with the question that he's answering now. Top of the next page, Yud Achas HaKushis HaIkri is he. One of the main questions is, Ma'u Atam, what's the reason? Concerning all the decrees and the destructions of the Jewish people that were in earlier generations. We make such a big tumult through establishing different fast days and establishing lamentations and etc. As opposed to the decrees at the terrible things that took place in the latter generation. Don't forget, this was 1956. Only a little bit over 10 years since World War II was over. That numerically, quantitatively, they seemingly were so much greater number than the other destructions that it was talking about in Jewish history. They were also in a way of terrible tortures. There was nothing like it in the earlier generations. They did not establish a specific fast and specific lamentations. The kivan shatoida mavhira, since the Torah clarifies, afilu makar shalekosu b'sefer hatoida azois, even those type of illnesses, plagues that's not written in this Torah, is also chas v'sholom going to come upon the Yidden at the end of days. We should have found a reason, according to Torah, to establish some type of commemoration for the decrees that were in the latter generation. So the question is, why not? Yud Aleph, this question in another, put in a different way, but we find the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe in his Sefer called Torah Oir. Mevur Sham Hayidua, it's explained over there what is known, Sheklolas Avoidas Ha'odam Ba'olam Hilevares Nitzoitzes HaKedusha Shenoflu Lamata. The general service of a person in this world, this is what we are supposed to accomplish till Moshiach's times, is to refine and elevate the sparks of holiness that fell down here below. Shem b'mispar rapach nitzutzim, that all told, they are 288 sparks. Doesn't seem like so many. Ukeshiyugmaru habirurim, when all the sparks will be refined, when it will be concluded, Yavi Mashiach will come. The Isa b'svarim, it's brought down in Svarim, shebemeshach Mosayim ve'eser shanim shel golos Mitzrayim, for over the 210 years of the exile Mitzrayim, nisbarer misper gadol shel nitzutzim, a great amount of these sparks that fell were elevated and refined. Reish beis nitzutzim, 202 out of the 288. Kemerum is b'mashakosav v'gam erev rav ola itam, that also a great multitude, or a great mixed multitude. And the word Rav is the numerical equivalent of Reish Beis 202. So the multitude that rose with them is not just referring to the people that came, but it refers to the sparks that were elevated. And therefore, since the year 2448, over 3,300 years ago, all that remained to refine is only 86 sparks. If so, the question arises: since over the duration of the last the duration of the 210 years of the exile Mitzrayim, the Jewish people were able to refine 202 sparks by being a number of 600,000, and the Rebbe in the footnote says it wasn't just tzaddikim amongst the 600,000. And even there were those that passed away during the plague of darkness. According to this calculation, if you calculate how many Yidden there has been since then, and how many years of Geulah have been since then, so therefore, surely, during the time of Geulah, that so many hundreds of years, come upon Kochel, and the Jewish people are much greater than 600,000 many times over. Hayitzrichim is man l'saim is bir ha'tzotzes. So it should have already been concluded, the refinement of the sparks, a long time ago. Therefore, the true and complete redemption should have taken place already. What's the reason that we haven't been successful to conclude and to finish off the refinement of the 86 sparks that are left over? The Rebbe explains concerning this. Just like in every matter, there's a general thing that includes in it many details. So it's concerning the sparks. The number 288 of the sparks is the number of the general sparks. When these sparks descended down here below, they were divided and they separated even more so to thousands and tens of thousands. In other words, they shattered into smaller and smaller pieces. Corresponding to this, there's also a difference in the avodah of the refinement of the sparks of the Eden. Sheneshamas gedoilus v'klolius, when you have large neshamas, huge neshamas, general neshamas, yechoila kol neshama levarer nitzutz klali koidem shenachlach liribi pratim. So one of these quote-unquote large neshamas is able to refine a general spark before it was shattered and broken down into many details. As opposed to when the generations decreased, became lessened, and the neshamas decreased as well. The refinement of a general spark is not in the capability, and not even within any comparison that an individual neshama can do it. That individual neshamas in the latter generations only have a capability is able to refine only one detail from the many details that were divided and separated from one general spark. So therefore, V'lachein, Bisman goes Mitzrayim, the time of the exile from Mitzrayim. Then the Jewish people were in the number of 600,000. We know that these 600,000 neshamas that went out of Mitzrayim were general neshamas. Kimevur Betanya, like it's explained in Tanya, that these 600,000 neshamas are called are called roots. And each one of these roots is divided into 600 and 1,000 sparks, and there's other details in that further. Because of the greatness of these neshamas during going out of Mitzrayim, they had the capability to refine these 202 general and large sparks. But after Mitzrayim, when the generations decreased, and the neshamas became lessened. They don't have the full force as the neshamas in the previous generations. Then it was divided and separated, the 86 sparks that were left. To thousands and tens of thousands and tens upon tens of thousands of sparks. Why did they break down? so that every individual should be able to do his job. So it should be the capability of the individual souls and the details of the souls to refine them. But if they wouldn't have broken down into such smaller pieces, so then a neshama of our generation or later generations would have no capability at all to refine those huge sparks. So the Rebbe now compares it to the different types of commemorations that we make for earlier situations to later situations. Oisyud Beis, umezem muvan gam choymere inyan shenasem tzad chisroini shal Yehudi echad ma'adoris aveshoinim liyosin neshama klos. From here it's understood also the severity of the matter that comes about because the lack of one Yid from the earlier generations, because he's a general neshama. Like the matter is also in the physical sense. As a result of the lack of one Yid in the generation that the Beis Hamikdash existed, physically, now we're not talking about the spiritual, then he's going to talk about the spiritual. One Yid being killed in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, the impact over all the generations of all the children that would have been born is so much greater. Since from a father and mother, many children are born, and each one of these children have many children. Nimtza comes out. When one Jew is lacking, is missing in the time of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, or in the time of the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, even the times of the decrees and the destructions following those eras, if they wouldn't have been killed, if they would have remained alive, so they would have had children and grandchildren, that one would turn into 1,000 and 10,000 and 10,000 10,000s. Through that is lacking and missing how many hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands in these days because of a loss of one soul in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. So he's saying, according to this understood the reason, that we establish a special fast day for the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Since a matter of destruction and annihilation that's so much more even quantitatively than the way it was after that. There's an interesting medrash that goes into calculating how many people were killed in Yerushalayim during the Churban Beis Hamikdash, and if you follow the calculations of the Gemara, the numbers come out in crazy numbers that couldn't have ever fit in Yerushalayim. And some of the Mefarshim explain that they're referring to what these people would have had in their offspring as well. Anyway, let's go back to Yud Gimel, second paragraph from the bottom. According to this, we can explain another topic. Since the obligation of every single Jew in Torah study is not just to review on what he studied and knows up till now, but also the person needs to come up with new interpretations in the Torah, like the expression to make it grow, to increase it. Nimtza comes out from time to time, b'chol yom every day, b'chol dor in every generation, b'chol tkufa in every era. It's constantly increasing new ideas in Torah that did not exist up till that period in time. because you have more Jews and more people alive, and more generations of Torah study, and each generation brings new insights that wasn't there in the previous generations. So the question arises, according to this comes out, if the redemption would have taken place many generations prior to, let's say, the present generation, it would have been lacking in the generation of the redemption all the Chidushei Torah that will be in the generation of the redemption of our times. After we have now in our possession, after all these generations, all the novel and new interpretations that came about from the Torah through the great people of our generations, those that are called Rishonim, those that are called the latter ones, and the latter of the latter ones. The answer for this corresponds to what we said before. The matters that we come up new in the Torah, they're not completely and totally new. Anything a diligent student will come up with in the future was given to Moshe Rabbeinu in Har Sinai. So what is he? But we're still calling it a Chiddush. Why is it called a Chiddush? The matter is the way that we're given to Moshe Rabbeinu in Har Sinai, we're given in a way of a general thing. And the novel and new interpretations of the diligent student is the things that were previously hidden in the rules or in the general things, and now they came out into detail. V'nimtza comes out, even if the redemption would have come in generations prior to this, so in the Torah, all the matters that came about in the latter generations, they would have been there, both in halami, in a concealed way, like a detail that's found concealed in the general principle and rule. For previous generations, it was sufficient if they wouldn't have had it detailed for them. Since they were greater neshamas and more general neshamas, in the general they had all the details. A simple example: the Gemara will take and analyze and chew over and break down the words of the Mishnah to be able to determine what is it actually trying to say. And there's discussions back and forth to be able to find out what was the meaning of the few very short words in the Mishnah. But in the times of the Mishnah, the people that were there understood that thing that we now call shorthand. They understood what they meant with those words in the Mishnah. It was only as the generations became lower that they started going ahead and needing to figure out what was the intention of the Mishnayos. So the same thing, all the Chidushim that for the present generation had to explicitly be stated were almost like self-understood and included in what was learned before without needing to explicitly state them. And that's what he says, as opposed to generations after this, that the hearts became lessened. If they will not detail the general thing into details, so our generations would not understand those details from the general thing. So we needed to be machadish. That great diligent student had to come up and explain to us, you know what this general thing it comes to teach us? You know what we can derive from this general principle? We can derive such and such. Similar to what we find in the Gemara ben Geulah Ilfa concerning a certain person called Ilfa Sha'amar, that he said, there is nothing that Reb Chia and Reb Oishia taught in what's called the Braisa that I could not have derived from the Mishnah. In other words, we didn't need the explanation of Reb Chia and Reb Oishia because I was able to derive it from the Mishnah. The Braisa is also written by Tanoim, but it's a further elucidation of the Mishnah, not as great as the Gemara. But to be able to do this, specifically, Ilfa was on such a high level that his Torah study was not such that he was able to derive it without the need for Reb Chia and Reb Oishia's explaining it. As opposed to other Talmidei Chachamim. The very colleagues of Ilfa, they would not be able to come to the conclusions of Reb Chia and Reb Oishia from the Mishnah. And then the Rebbe even says the same thing goes with the written Torah and the oral Torah. So too, going even higher and previous to that, concerning the inclusion of all the matters of the oral Torah and the written Torah. There is nothing that has not been hinted in the Torah. No part of the oral Torah does not have a hint somewhere in the written Torah. Even in times of the Gemara, they weren't able to, not everybody was able to find and to reveal in the written Torah the matters that are hinted the way they're explained in the oral Torah. The Rebbe goes on further, very interesting about inventions that came along. So too we can explain concerning the development of print. In the earlier generations, the Torah was able to reach everywhere. Through scribes, it was manuscripts, everything was written, even the Gemaras were written. As in Yoni Torah, they copied the matters of Torah, and copies were copied from the copies. And you had to check over, you had to be magia every single copy individually, so no mistakes could have crept into it. And they were able to be successful. Why? Because there wasn't so many copies necessary. Since there were relatively fewer copies than there are now when we print Svarim. But in generations following it, so the world got this new invention, the printing press. That one copy that was checked over one time, it can be reprinted many times, hundreds and thousands of copies. Even when it comes to the printing, even one review and one editing and checking up is sufficient only to a certain amount of copies, in a smaller amount of numbers of what they use, they made. The actual I forgot what they're called, but the letters that they use to the stamp for the print eventually becomes rubbed out. And becomes rubbed out, you need to replace them with other letters. You replace them with other letters, so you also have to check it again, make sure that you're not replacing it with the wrong words, the wrong letters. And for this, there's now a new type of thing in printing, that it's possible to print it in a way of a photograph. What he means is they called it a photo offset, which is another way of, similar to the principle of a photocopier, but this was a printing machine type of thing. Through that they could reprint again and again. You don't have to worry so much about letters becoming rubbed out, even with those, since they made copies of original copies, eventually if you see, let's say, the old Til Shemsidurim, the letters are starting to crack and break and things like that. So too that one copy that was checked one time is enough for thousands upon thousands and tens upon tens of thousands of copies. Also here the same question arises. That everything Hashem created in the world, He only created for His honor. Surely the invention of the printing press was, and the way it actually happened, that first and foremost, it was to print matters of Torah's Moshe. And it's actually known one of the earliest usages of the printing presses were for Jewish Sfarim. They were the most popular market at the beginning of the age of the printing press. And also the perfections and the developments, like we said, the photo offset and so on, that printing now had, is also for his glory and honor, to spread out the Torah of life. Why did Hashem not ensure that we had the printing press from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu? And the answer for this is similar to what we said before. In the early generations, these were general souls. That's why every neshama that's still in a general level, he could fulfill its obligation of all the details that are included in it, to study it and to give it life. In other words, the general neshama that contains, let's say, 100,000 neshamas in it, just to pull out a number out of a hat. By that general neshama studying, it is studying and enlivening and illuminating all the 100,000 neshamas that are part of it. Therefore, you only need one copy of a book for 100,000, because that one copy is enough for 100,000 neshamas that are within this person. As opposed to these generations, that every general one, every general all-inclusive thing was divided and detailed to many, many details, and details of details. After every neshama becomes a specific detail. So then Chaim learning doesn't help for Shmuel's learning. It's a mitzvah on a person's body. There are certain types of mitzvahs that are related to a person's body that someone else cannot fulfill your obligation for you. Let's say if one person puts on film, it's not going to help the other person. The same thing, one person learning Torah is not going to fulfill the obligation for the other person has to study Torah. Therefore, it's necessary for every single detail of the Bnei Yisrael that he should have this Sefer HaTorah, they should be able to study in it. Since in our generations came about this new thing, the need that Torah should reach to a greater amount of Jewish people, there had to be in the world the idea of printing, and the development of printing presses, so that Torah should reach all and we could extend this to the idea of the development of computer and emails and publishing things on the web, etc., etc. And then the Rebbe is going to talk about how special it is to use all of these things for the spreading of Yiddishkeit. So he says in Tezvav, since we have arrived at this point, we have to clarify concerning those that their job is to do printing. They have to put in their effort in spreading the wellsprings outward. So let's skip over the next page. Let's go a little bit further than halfway down the page. 3 paragraphs on the bottom of the page. Even someone that has to be involved in printing, also in permitted matters, in matters that are not svarim, because of matters of peace. Because in other words, this is his job, and he can't just tell the guy in charge of the printing press, "I'm only printing Jewish stuff." He has to do it because of the ways of peace. But if not for that, he has to realize that this is not his purpose. His purpose is, I was created to serve my Maker. Therefore, let's skip over to 3 lines from the end of the paragraph. Even when we speak about permitted things, we need to make it clear so the person has to use and invest all of his powers and capabilities for spreading the wellsprings of Hashem outward. All of Liskar, you have to remember that divine providence set the person on a good portion, meaning he gave him a great opportunity. That through him could be increased the teaching of the living Hashem to many specific neshamas, to their children and grandchildren. Therefore, it's inappropriate to take the bread that Hashem gave him and to give it to his non-Jewish servants and maidservants. I'll skip to the next paragraph. All of Lidrash Ma'akadosh Baruch Hu is demand from Hashem. He only wants to be from those that are being asked lemishkan, to give for the mishkan v'noisnim, and to give. In other words, he should have the opportunity to do everything for kedusha. To bring the word of Hashem. This is the idea of the printing press. To bring the word of Hashem to everyone as it's necessary, and also in the language that person needs. Let's skip over again in the next paragraph to let's just go over to the next paragraph. No skipping. When they suggest to him to print other matters, when it comes to things that are the opposite of holiness, definitely he will not allow it in his domain. Also concerning matters that are permitted, when it comes to permitted matters, he has to be cheap, he has to save up in his time and his energy. It's better that he should use these moments for spreading the wellsprings outward. Until the time comes, will be fulfilled the promise that the earth will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem, like waters covers the sea. All will know me. Therefore, a man will not teach his fellow. Why? Every single Jew will receive from the source. This is what we find, that King Moshiach will teach Torah with all the Jewish people. The lechura seemingly how would be the capability of one person to teach the thousands and tens of thousands of Yidden, because this study will be in a way of vision, that they be able to see the actual thing. This is also a lesson to each and every one. That he has to hold precious, and he has to treasure every moment and every matter that was given to him by divine providence, to use it for the Mishkan, to make for Hashem a home down here below. Later on in this Farbrengen, there's a piece over here where the Rebbe actually addressed, it's brought down in a later footnote over here in this Farbrengen, where the Rebbe addressed actual people that were involved in printing stuff for Merkez Linyan Chinuch, in other words, for Kahas. And I'm just going to read the footnote. He said that he was telling someone that was involved about printing, and he was worried about being able to print everything and so on. The Rebbe said that the Eibusher should give you that the printing should be in such a type of way that you'll be able to print a lot of chassidus and a lot of things for Merkez Linyan Chinuch, and a lot of it will spread out, and it'll influence everybody else.